This is A Geek Leader. Hey guys, welcome to episode 145 of A Geek Leader Podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda, and today's episode is brought to you by Private Internet Access. And if you haven't used Private Internet Access, then you're probably not surfing the web securely. I use Private Internet Access whenever I'm connecting from my home to do anything, whenever I travel especially. I remember a couple years ago I went to a conference, and as soon as I connected to the hotel Wi-Fi, my endpoint protection was like pinging me that I was not secure, that I was getting attacked by different folks. So I immediately opened up Private Internet Access, connected to my VPN, and all that went away. Private Internet Access is an encryption service. It encrypts all your traffic going in and out. You can also choose different geolocations. So if I'm testing something, I make a change, and my DNS servers are caching in my area, I can hop on over and log in California and then test it and say, oh, okay, DNS here, doesn't have the cache that I had before, so I can see the changes that I've made accurately, and it makes things so much easier and so much better. And you can try Private Internet Access for just $3 a month. Seriously, $3.33 a month is what it's starting at. You just visit ageekleader.com/VPN. Again, that's ageekleader.com/VPN. All right, Geek Leaders, today on the show, we've got Gregg Ward. He's the author of a book about respectful leadership, and we're going to talk all about that today as we get started. He's also the CEO of the Gregg Ward Group, which is a management consulting and training and coaching firm to help leaders become respectful leaders in their industries, help develop emotional intelligence and just executive presence skills. So, Gregg, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on.
If you don't mind telling the audience just a little bit about how you got to where you are now, how did the Gregg Ward Group get started, and what was your career like before that?
Well, I tell people that I've lived 3, maybe 4 lives in my nearly 60 years on the planet.
Well, if you're a cat, you've got 5 left. So,
I've started. I'm a New Yorker by birth, and I actually trained to work in the professional theater as an actor, writer, director, and producer. And while I was a starving artist in New York City, I was hired by the New York City Police Department to help develop a training program on how to manage what they call EDPs, emotionally disturbed persons. And they wanted to use live professional theater and improvisation techniques in this training program with cops to give them a sense of what it's really like in a safe environment to deal with schizophrenics, drug addicts, you name it, that kind of folks. And so I headed up the team, I cast the actors, and we put together a really surprisingly effective program that worked much better than anybody thought it would be. And we eventually got featured on CNN, and New York Times wrote about us, and we were considered, this is way back in the 1980s, we were considered a groundbreaking training methodology that I still fortunately have the opportunity to do to this day. And so from there, I started to branch out and work in the corporate and government sector using these tools and techniques. And eventually, about 20 years ago, I began to focus down onto leadership. And so that's what I've been doing for about 25 years. And came out with a book in 2016 called The Respectful Leader. And that has done really well. And I speak, I lead training, I use my professional actors whenever I can to teach leadership techniques. And that's what I've been doing for the last 25, 30 years.
Very cool, very cool. Why did respect and leadership kind of come together as a topic for you of your interest and passion?
Well, I think that anybody who's ever worked in the performing arts knows that artists can be considered very interesting and maybe even entertaining, but not a lot of people have respect for artists. They think they're just too weird, which as an insider and an outsider, I can attest that is true. And so respect is not the first thing people think of when they think about artists. And I found that as I developed and grew into my practice, that the more research I did, the more I realized that it's just not just artists who aren't respected, but it's just about everyone. And on the flip side, everybody wants to be respected, but they don't quite understand what that means for them. and people who are trying to offer respect don't necessarily know what they should be doing. So respect as a concept is all around us. It's just poorly understood, and as a result, especially in the business world, it's undervalued and therefore considered a warm and fuzzy or a nice to have, but not necessarily a business imperative. And all of the research I've done has led me to the conclusion, all the work I've done with all these different organizations over the years has led me to the conclusion that respect is absolutely a key component of productivity, performance, and partnership.
Yeah, and coming from a tech background, and my whole career has been in technology or around technology in one way or the other, you see a lot of people that don't necessarily have respect for others, and I don't know if it's it's hard to describe, because when you do catch that person that's very respectful, sometimes you kind of wonder, like, what is their downfall? Why are they so respectful? Why don't they have the ego that some developers have? And it's kind of been I don't know if it's a trademark of some techies of not being respectful, but what are some things that we need to be cautious about whenever we have those stereotypes of lack of respect in technology?
Well, I think that's a great question, first of all. What do we need to be cautious about? What do we need to be aware about in the world of technology? I have found over the years, and I've worked with a ton of technology companies, that there are a lot of super smart people. And a lot of them are subject matter experts. They are the best, the most knowledgeable in their particular field. And there's almost this attitude of, hey, I've killed myself over many years of study, research, and work to become this expert, and nobody knows it as much as me. So anybody coming into our sphere, I feel like, okay, I've got to dumb myself down and dumb my work down so they get it. So there's this kind of clubbiness about being in the work that we do in technology, where we're the best, we know what we're doing, everybody else doesn't know. And I don't have time to deal with some fool who doesn't understand. And so I think that's very, very common. And it doesn't come from a place of arrogance. It comes more from a place of our need to work very quickly. As I'm sure you know, our organizations, our leadership are demanding more from us quicker and with fewer and less resources than ever before. And even though our profit margins are magnificent and wonderful and our revenues are great, we are driving, especially our technology people, really, really hard and really, really fast. And in a way, it's a thankless job. Mm-hmm. It's like if it works, everybody's like, fine, great, it works. If it doesn't work, oh my God, then the world is coming to an end. So it's a tough world to work in technology, especially technology development, where failures are common. And so I think the people develop a defensiveness and a sense of, hey, I know what I'm doing, don't waste my time. And that can be perceived by others as disrespectful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes as leaders and managers, we're as much to blame as the disrespectful employee sometimes by letting people by putting pressure on them to get things done, and then tell them, like, hey, well, you don't have time to be nice about it. Cut to the chase. Get right to it. And
right.
And sometimes that is perceived as disrespectful. I totally get that.
And there's a distinction I'd like to make. You mentioned we don't have time to be nice. Mm-hmm. And that's a common assumption, that being respectful is being nice. And I want to split those two things apart.
Excellent.
You don't have to be nice to be respectful. In fact, I can be very blunt and direct with you, John, if you're my direct report, and you would still consider me respectful, but you would in no way say I was being nice, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And the reverse is also true. I could be as nice as can be, but you wouldn't necessarily find it respectful if you don't perceive it to be respectful, if that makes sense. So being nice and being respectful are not the same things. Sometimes they do come together. But generally speaking, I would say nice is a nice to have, and respect is a must have.
So how would you define respect then?
Essentially, respect is the golden rule, which we're all familiar with, which is do unto others as you would have them do unto you, working in concert with the platinum rule. And the platinum rule is a little bit less well known. It's do unto others as they would have you do unto them. Because respect is in the eye of the receiver. John, you may be a very straightforward kind of guy, and if I treat you in a very straightforward, direct manner, you would actually say to yourself, okay, he's treating me with respect. He's treating me the way I want to be treated. But let's say that you're an extreme introvert, John, and I came at you hard and fast and was very familial with you and very much buddy and palsy and brosy with you, and you were like, dude, you're making me uncomfortable. This is not respectful to me. You're in my space. So I would need to, as your boss, I would need to learn what you consider to be respectful. And generally speaking, that's the platinum rule. Do unto others as they would have you do unto them.
Yeah, totally. I totally get that. And that's we've had that debate with different managers that I've been talking to not too long ago, where they say, well, you need to treat people the way you want to be treated, and I'll say, no, you need to treat them the way they want to be treated. Some people,
exactly.
They want you to come in the morning and say, hello, good morning, welcome, all nice and happy, and other people are not morning people, and they just want to be left alone until they get that second cup of coffee.
So true.
You got to figure out who those people are and address them differently. And
that's right. And if you make that effort, you can even be very blunt. People always say to me, well, how am I supposed to know? And my response is ask.
Yeah,
just to ask.
Exactly.
How do you want to be, John? How do you want to be treated in the morning? Do you want me to say hello, how are you? Or do you want me to leave you the heck alone and let me know? And I'll go with what your needs are. But and as you could probably tell, John, I'm a real extrovert. So I'm like, hi, hello, however, my wife used to joke with me that I would have a deep conversation about the world with the garbage man if I could just get him to stop the truck, right? So I'll talk to anybody anytime. And so I'm very, very kind of extroverted that way. I know for a fact that most folks in the technology field are nowhere near as extroverted as I am.
Yeah, I'm totally not extroverted.
Yeah, exactly. So I've got to figure that out. If you're coming to work for me, I got to figure that out. That's my job. Quite frankly, when I have leaders complain to me, I don't have time to figure out what everybody needs. I'm like, dude, that's what you're getting paid for. You're not an individual contributor. You're supposed to lead a team of people, figure out what they need in order to perform at their best.
Yeah, I think that's, and it goes back to your point about being nice versus respectful. It's nice to tell people good morning, but if they don't want to hear it, it's not necessarily respectful.
It's not nice at all. Exactly. And some people, if I'm giving you feedback on a project, some people don't want that direct. You know what? You screwed up here. That's harsh on them. So that you need to figure out, okay, how can they hear the feedback better? Would it be better to give it to them in a 5-point email, the feedback on the project, or do they want to hear it in person? Or would it be better to have a team meeting and not point anybody out and say, okay, here's where the challenges are. How can we all work together to make this work better, rather than just going at one person? So there's all sorts of ways to be respectful. But it's not necessarily needing to be nice at the same time. I've known organizations where the leaders are so nice that they never get around to telling their people that they've made mistakes. They're too afraid to just give that feedback. They just want to be so nice. And it's called an overly nice organization. Those are deadly, absolutely deadly. They don't get work done.
Yeah, I've worked at a place where people have been there, and the culture is to brag about the fact that we've had people here for 20 and 30 years in the same role. But then if you talk to their managers, they're like, yeah, well, they're just mediocre. But we're too nice to really push them into. And I was like, well, you can only be mediocre for so long, but at this place, they're mediocre for forever.
Yep, and we just they keep kind of chunking along. And if things are going well, then you just sort of keep moving. But if they're not going well, do we have the courage to say, okay, it's time to cut this person loose? And if we do cut them loose, they're like, what are you talking about? I got meets expectations every year. What's the problem here? So they become blindsided because their leaders were not courageous enough to call them on their stuff and challenge them to be more than mediocre.
Yeah, so let's get on that path. It's not really what I planned to ask you about, but feedback. Feedback's one of the things that, I've actually, my entire management leadership career, have kind of struggled with one-on-ones and feedback, and I've changed the way I've done it many different times. And what I do now is I try to, before I have a one-on-one with someone, I will spend, 15 minutes or so, between 5 and 15 minutes, depending on the person, just thinking about what has their day like been so far. What's their commute like? Do they have kids that they have to drop off at school? Is the traffic bad? Is it raining outside? And when they got to work, what kind of things were waiting in their inbox? What's their ticket queue look like if they're responding to help desk tickets or something like that? And I try to put myself in their place to have that empathy so I can relate to them. But I don't know if that's necessarily the most respectful way of handling it. Is there another way? What do you think about feedback?
Well, I thought the way you're handling it is excellent, because you're showing a high level of emotional intelligence just by the fact that you're putting yourself into their shoes. So I would definitely applaud you for that. I think the other thing that we always have to be aware of when we give feedback is, yes, take care of the person to make sure they can hear the feedback, but deliver the feedback in a way that's about addressing the problem and not negating the person, if that makes sense. Generally, my advice is, hey, if I'm giving you feedback, I'm going to focus on, of course, what are the good parts of what you're doing, and, of course, what needs to improve. And when I talk about what needs to improve, I put it in terms of, hey, here's the issue, here's the problem, here's the expectation we have of you, and here's where we want you to go, and how can I support you and ensure that you can get there. So it's always from a leader's point of view, it's always about helping the person hear the feedback and supporting them in developing themselves and getting better at whatever it is you want them to get better at. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes perfect sense. And I think the part that really stuck out to me the most was make it about the problem, not the person, because
right.
Sometimes we say you're doing a bad job, you're doing this incorrectly, but we need to talk about the action, not the person. And I fall into that trap sometimes too.
Absolutely, and quite frankly, when we're so busy, sometimes that's just a shorthand. Hey, you screwed up here. Do better. Well, that raises all sorts of defensiveness. Mm-hmm. And the moment a person's defensive, they shut down. They can't hear what the feedback is, and they're going to focus more on what they consider to be disrespect from their boss rather than on the actual problem that needs to be solved. And the research tells us that if an employee feels disrespected by you in the way you delivered the feedback, not only will they ruminate on that, and from what we understand, roughly 80% of employees who feel disrespected will waste time at work ruminating on that disrespect, but also they will be less motivated to fix the problem that you wanted to fix in the first place. And if they do fix it, they'll fix it more out of fear of how you might react if they don't get it right, rather than as a developmental, as a getting it right for right's sake, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so basically, if they're disrespected, they're going to be actively disengaged at work. And if they do correct behavior, it's more of a fear-based, which means they're probably not going to be innovative. They're not going to be willing to take risks. They're not going to trust your leadership. And they're going to be walking on eggshells while they're there and probably less productive.
Absolutely. So the second skill in giving feedback is handling defensiveness. And I have never in my life given feedback where someone didn't get slightly defensive. I've always seen a little bit of defensiveness. I could be great at giving feedback, but there's always going to be a certain bit of defensiveness. I don't care who the person is. So what we need to do is focus on what we actually do respect in the individual that we're giving the feedback to. And let me break this down a little bit more. Most of us respect our colleagues for three things. The first is their knowledge and experience. Mm-hmm. Most of us have colleagues that we work with who are very knowledgeable and very experienced in the work they do. And so we have a lot of respect for them for that. We also might respect them for the position they've attained as a result of that knowledge and experience. So that's the first area that we tend to respect our employees for. The second area is their talents and skills. Some people we work with have just incredible talents or have developed these incredible skills. They're the go-to person on a particular issue or a particular program or software, what have you. They're just the person, and you go to them and rely on them for that. So we have a lot of respect for that. Now, the third area might surprise you. It's how they treat us and other people. So if you have an employee who is respectful, who is decent to others, who treats people fairly, and who steps up to the plate and does their job in a good way, it's likely you're going to have a lot of respect for them. But if you have an employee who's really rough around the edges, hard to get along with, kind of offensive to other people, and people let you know that their colleague is that way, your respect for them is going to go down. And respect is a feeling thing. It's not just a cognitive thinking thing. It's a feeling thing. So if you feel disrespected, that's going to overshadow those other things such as talents and skills or experience and knowledge. So the point I'm trying to say is when you're giving somebody feedback, you got to figure out, what do I respect this person for, and build that into the feedback. Hey, John, you've been doing this work for a long time. I totally respect your talents and skills in this area of technology. I totally respect it. And we've got some challenges here with what's going on with this part of your work. How can we figure out together, how can I support you to make sure that this works out better than it is now? I think if I gave you feedback that way, John, you'd probably stay open to what I had to say. Is that fair?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, cool. So handling the defensiveness is a skill that all leaders need to have.
Yeah, that's and it's one of those things that you're not taught. When I became a manager, they didn't teach me about how to handle defensive, how to reduce how to give feedback. They didn't even teach me how to give feedback or how to do one-on-ones. It was more like, here's your budget.
Right. And so I spend a lot of my work now in what I call the Respectful Leader Workshop, teaching managers and leaders how to give feedback, how to handle defensiveness. I use a tool that I call respectful remarks. Mm-hmm. It's as simple as saying, John, I respect you for your talents and skills. I also say, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't bring it to your attention as your boss that we have a challenge in this area. So I use the phrase, I wouldn't be doing my job. And the employee can't really argue with that. It's true. That's your job to point these things out to the employee. Another thing you can say is acknowledge reality. Sometimes getting feedback is not the most exciting and fun thing to do. I totally acknowledge the reality that this feedback can be hard for you to hear. I get it. So you're putting yourself in that other person's shoes. Another way to do it is a phrase you can use that I call a contrasting comparison. I could say, John, I have no doubt that it was not your intention to cause this problem. I don't think you intended to cause this problem. Mm-hmm. I think you were actually just trying to get this job done, or you were trying to do X, Y, and Z. And so what I'm doing in a way is psychologically I'm letting you off the hook. Yeah, we've got a problem here, but John, I don't think you were maliciously trying to screw things up. I think you were trying to do something else. It just didn't work out. And if I say something like that to you, psychologically, you'll say to yourself, yeah, that's true. I wasn't trying to deliberately cause this problem. I was just trying to do this. And so you're much more likely to hear my feedback if I give you that benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. I think whenever you put someone in a position where they don't think you're on a witch hunt looking for them, or you're going to try to find them messing up, you're showing them that you don't believe this was intentional. You know it was a mistake. We're going to correct how to handle that so it doesn't happen again, not to get rid of you or to find fault in you.
Exactly. You've got it. And with some people, you kind of have to tell them up front is you have to be really direct and say, look, you're not being fired. Okay.
Yeah.
because a lot of people, especially folks who are new on the team and they made a mistake, they're like, oh my God, they're going to fire me. I was in that position a long time ago. I started working in an office environment where I was hired to input a whole bunch of training manuals into a computer, which I guess you're not old enough to remember the Apple IIe. John, do you remember that computer?
So we're recording this on January 25th, right? Or 24th?
24th, yes, sir.
Yeah, so January 24th, 1984, Apple's Macintosh came out.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
Yeah, to the date. I got an alert this morning from someone on my team who posted on our Slack channel that said, hey, did you know that today in history...
That's the computer I was hired to use.
Yeah, actually, I used that to play games when I was in school.
Okay.
So.
Okay. So if you know that computer, you know it has an external drive, and that you had to save your work on what they used to call floppy disks.
Yeah, mine had two drives. We had an A and a B drive. You ran your application on the A drive and saved it to the B drive.
Exactly. Well, I was under the gun to work so fast that I didn't back up my work on the B drive anywhere near as much as I should have. And then that computer, if you remember it, had a tendency to crash. Oh, yeah. And sure enough, I was about 3 weeks into the job, and I had not nearly saved as much, and it crashed on me. And I lost a good third of my work. And so I went to tell my boss, and I thought, okay, he's going to fire. He's going to blow a gasket, and he's going to fire me. And what was interesting is he took a very deep breath. He uttered a few curses, not at me, more at the situation. And then he said, look, Greg, I can tell you're really upset about this. And I said, I am so sorry. I feel awful about this. He said, well, you know what? You're no good right now. I want you to go home, and I want you to collect yourself. And then I want you to come back here tomorrow morning and pick up where you left off and see how much you can recover. We're under a deadline, but I have faith in you. And I was like, wow, okay. And I did go home, but I didn't come back the next morning. I came back that night after he left. This was in the days where you could go walk back into your office building in New York City without having to check in with the security guard. And I went back in that night, and I pulled an all-nighter. And the next morning, he walked in about 8:30. He was stunned to see me there. And I had recovered nearly all of what I'd lost by pulling that all-nighter. And he was so impressed, and we got the job done on time, that he hired me full-time. I was a temp at that time. He hired me full-time, and I worked for him for 4 more years.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
Great leader. Great leader.
What was there was a quote where someone messed up. I think it was at IBM or HP. Who knows where it actually happened, where someone messed up and lost like $100,000, and they came into their boss and they said something like, "You're going to fire me now, right?" And he's like, "No, why would I fire you? I just spent $100,000, training you." Yeah.
Exactly. No, he was pissed. I will never deny that he wasn't angry, but he didn't direct it at me, and he didn't call me a fool or an idiot or anything like that. He just cursed the situation, and that's fair. I get it. I was cursing too. But at the end of the day, he showed that he had faith in me, and he gave me a second chance. And when he gave me that second chance, I felt like $1 million. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to do anything I can for this guy, because he gave me that opportunity to redeem myself. And I try to live my life that way too.
That's it. That's a great way to live your life. So, when you wrote this book, I'm sure you did a lot of research. What is the science behind the idea of being respectful to one another? What's our history and science behind that?
Sure. Well, it's actually fairly recent neuroscience that's come out, and I think you know a little bit about the reptilian brain and release of hormones and things like that. And what we found is that, in a nutshell, if I treat you in a way that you feel is respectful towards you, your amygdala, which is part of your reptilian limbic system in your brain, the amygdala gives the signal to release a hormone known as oxytocin. And oxytocin is also called the bonding hormone or the love hormone. Now, it's not a huge hit. You don't get a wave of oxytocin, but you get a little bit of a hit. So if I treat you in a way that you feel respected, you're going to have a little oxytocin. And by the way, interestingly enough, my brain releases a little bit of oxytocin into my system as well. So I feel pretty good about treating you with respect. You feel good about me treating you with respect, and it's good for both of us. And then it moves into the neocortex, the latest part of the brain to develop an evolution, which is the thinking part of your brain, where all the higher level math and science and music and writing, that all occurs in the neocortex. And so what you do after you have that hit of oxytocin, you start thinking about me in a way that you feel like you judge me to be respectful. And you use words and language in your head that is about respect and feeling good and all that kind of stuff. Eventually, if I continue to treat you in that way, you will put on what I call a pair of sunglasses. And the sunglasses have on their lenses the words respectful person. And you will look at me all the time through these sunglasses as a respectful person. And you'll always have that hit of oxytocin every time I treat you in a way you consider to be respectful. Now, the reverse is also true. If I treat you, John, in a way that you consider to be disrespectful, your brain, way down in the brain stem, where the autonomic controls of your brain occur, like the breathing and heart rate, but also what occurs in the brain stem is the flight, fight, or freeze response.
Yeah, the cortisol.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if your primitive brain interprets my disrespectful behavior as a threat, it is immediately going to send a signal to the amygdala to release 3 hormones. One is cortisol, also known as the stress hormone. Mm-hmm. The next is adrenaline, which is basically designed to help you fight or flee. Mm-hmm. And the third is a little harder to pronounce, norepinephrine, which is a complicated batch of hormone that supports and impacts the other two. So you're going to get this sort of strong hit of threat feelings washing through you. And if I continue to behave that way towards you, eventually in your cognitive neocortex, you're going to start saying to yourself, this guy is a disrespectful jerk. And you're going to put on another pair of sunglasses, and on the lenses of those sunglasses is written the words disrespectful jerk. And you're going to continue to see me through those lenses going forward. So the point of all of this is that our brains are, when it comes to respect and disrespect, it's much more of a feeling thing than it is a cognitive, rational thing. And once my clients who are in the technology field, as you are, understand the neuroscience behind respect and disrespect, well, then all of a sudden that makes a lot more sense to them.
Mm-hmm. I think feelings are, especially in the tech industry, they're kind of downplayed significantly.
Oh, yeah.
And we always talk about, well, what's the analytics? What do the numbers say? Well, sometimes it's just got to feel right, you know?
Yes.
And I think it was one of Simon Sinek's books that I read that talked a lot about the feeling that you get by the order of the, I think it was start with why. We talked about how to start with why, because if you start with that sentence, it changes the way you feel about the product, and the feeling is what matters. And I think the same thing could be held true when it comes to your manager, your boss. If people don't feel confident, they don't feel comfortable with them, even if they're doing all the right things, but they don't have that sense of feeling, it's just not going to work out.
It's not going to work. Now, Joseph Ledoux is a famous neuroscientist at NYU. He says, we need to remember that we are not thinking beings who happen to have emotions. We are emotional beings first, and then we happen to think. So if all of us acknowledge that we are emotional beings first, before we are rational cognitive beings, that's going to help us a lot. And it's about turning up your emotional intelligence, being aware of your own emotions and the emotions of those around you, and managing those effectively. And that's really what I try to hit my technology clients over the head with. You can't just ignore emotions. Just as you said, you just can't bury yourself in the analytics or hide behind your computer screen if you're a leader. If you're a solo contributor, you don't have to. You can get by very much by being an introverted genius in the technology world. But at the end of the day, if you're going to be a manager, if you're going to be a leader, your job is to develop your emotional intelligence.
How much does self-awareness play into that, and maybe how would one help develop that self-awareness?
I think that is the key. Without self-awareness, we cannot be aware of those around us. And self-awareness is sometimes the hardest thing to do. I found that with some of my clients, the way they become self-aware is getting hit over the head with a baseball bat by somebody they respect. And that's kind of pretty common. Is finally somebody's taken them sides and given them a good whack up the side of the head and said, do you have any idea how disrespectful you're being? Do you have any idea? And
that's how it happened to me.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, you got to tell me that story. What happened?
So when I became a manager many years ago, I was pretty bad and pretty terrible at it. And I eventually got a mentor, and I had high turnover. And at one point, I had 2 people quit on the same day.
Oh,
and I go and talk to my mentor. I call him up and I start telling him about it. And I'm like, yeah, it's just because, at the time I was at a company that was probably 30 miles from Charlotte, maybe 20 miles from Charlotte. And I kept saying, oh, they're just going to the banks in Charlotte. They're making more money. That's why they're all leaving. And he goes, I don't think it's the banks. And I was like, well, what do you think it is? He's like, it's probably you. I mean, people don't quit their jobs. They quit their bosses.
That's right.
I was like, oh, my gosh, I think he's right.
Yep.
So that was kind of my open moment.
Did he coach you on developing your emotional intelligence?
Yeah, he coached me a lot about. Well, he gave me a lot of pathways forward to find leadership, like books, and we watched TED Talks together. We talked about them. And just developed the communication that I was lacking.
Yep. Now here's the key: you were okay with that. You respected him enough to hear that message. That's number one. Mm-hmm. And secondly, you had an epiphany about yourself, and you were willing to change. That's the key. I have been contracted many times to work with senior managers who are really smart and really accomplished, and they've succeeded really well, but they have the emotional intelligence of a gnat. They just don't have it. And so the company says to me, you got to work with this guy. You got to turn him around. And I said, my response is, I'll give it a shot. But if he doesn't want to turn around, if he doesn't want to change, if he doesn't want to develop, I could be a genius at this and it won't matter. If he doesn't want it, you wanted it. You were willing to make the change. Mm-hmm. But if a person doesn't want it, I just go back to the leadership and I say, guys, I can't help you here. This person is not interested in changing. And no matter how much we try, that's not going to happen. So you have to make a decision of whether you want to keep this person on board. Is it worth keeping them on board? And if it is, then you got to figure out a way to box them away from everybody else so they don't cause any more disruption. But sometimes it's just so bad. And that's what I write about in my book. That's what my book's all about, The Respectful Leader. It's a story. It's a fable about a fictional corporation based on all my clients over the years. And in it, there's a character who's brilliant. He's the head of R&D in this company that I created. And but he is very abrasive to the point of being a bully, a jerk, and he offends a lot of people. Turnover is terrible, and he's been doing it for years. And the CEO goes to him and tries to get him to change, and he changes a little bit, and then he reverts back to form once he has another success. So my argument is, you know what? No one is irreplaceable. And just because you think your person is the one person responsible for all the revenues coming into this company and you got to keep him no matter what, you better do a cost-benefit analysis of whether he or she really is worth keeping. Because if you've got high turnover, you've got complaints, you've got lawsuits coming, you've got all sorts of problems, customers are pissed off. Really? Is that person really worth keeping? So make a plan. Figure out a plan and put them on a performance improvement plan. Put them on even if they're the senior VP of whatever, I don't care. Put them on a plan. Hold them accountable for meeting the plan to change. And if they don't, you've already developed a way to move them out and you found somebody to replace them.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And, it goes back to the person they have to want it,
Yep. Yep. And I can't tell you how many times I've worked with leadership teams where they've accommodated the bad behavior because of their connection, their friendship. We developed this company together. We grew it, exponentially in revenue growth over the past 5 years. How can I get rid of this guy? Well, if you want to do what's right for the company, you're going to figure out a way to move that person out and do it effectively. But if you're not willing to step up and do what's right, then you look at the newspaper every day of companies that are unwilling to step up and do what's right. I'll use the Wells Fargo as an example. I mean, everybody knew that there was this internal drive to basically cheat with customers and open up these phony accounts and show all sorts of revenue growth and account generation that really wasn't there. The cheating was rampant, and it was all the way to the top, but nobody had the courage to say this has got to stop. No one had the courage to tell the CEO to shut it down. And then you had that enormous fallout from it. Lots of people laid off. Wells Fargo took a significant hit, although they're back again. It's just amazing. Just drives me nuts, but that's another story.
Yeah. Well, how can people find out more about your book, and where can they pick it up and maybe connect with you?
Well, they can connect with me through my website, greggwardgroup.com, and Gregg is spelled with 2 G's at the end. It's all my mother's fault. Gregg, Ward, W-A-R-D, group.com. They can get the book by just going to respectfulleader.com, and it's for sale on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, all online. There's a audio version of the book, and if anybody wants to reach out to me and needs some coaching, I'm happy to offer a 15 to 20 minute, just no selling, just let me help you solve your problem, and we'll see how that goes.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Gregg, and I'll link that up in the show notes. You can also find this book at geekleader.com. We have our books of our guests on there, and you can find it there. And Gregg, thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. I really appreciate you, John.
Hope you guys enjoyed that episode with Gregg Ward, and definitely check out his book, The Respectful Leader. I thoroughly enjoyed it. You can find that book and more books from guests on our show at geekleader.com. Also, if you're not surfing the web securely, don't forget about the offer that we talked about at the beginning of the show at geekleader.com/VPN to get your private internet access for less than $4 a month, and you can surf the web securely. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate you guys, and thank you guys for all the ratings and reviews you've left for me. I really appreciate that. And also, thanks for sharing this episode and all of the other episodes that you share with your friends and on social media. Thanks so much. Have a great weekend.